Today's daf is daf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph. We're going to start with umimai, which is 4 lines down from the top. The Gemara had tried to find a source to pin down Rabbi Eliezer to maintain Zev V'zeh Gorem Os. And the Gemara found a source in a Mishnah in Masechta Orla. The case was where there was a mixture of CR. CR means a leavening agent of chulin that got mixed up with CR shel truma. And there was an isa, a dough, and the question is whether the chulin becomes truma, and the truma generates an isa on the chulin. According to the Mishnah, it all depends as to whether this CR, which is a leavening agent, actually had a power to cause chimutz. And according to the Tanakama, if the truma was kedei lahachmitz, then the tarovas is prohibited. According to Rabbi Eliezer, even though the truma did not have the power to create leavening, nevertheless it would generate an Isur if it was Achra, if it was the last. So the Siyar Shel Chulin fell in first. The Siyar Shel Truma now clinches the process of Chimutz, and therefore the mixture is considered Truma and it's Os. Whereas according to the Chachamim, it matters not which fell first. Abaye, on the top here of Chav Zayin, made a comment, we saw it yesterday, to the effect that according to Rabbi Eliezer, when do we say that if the CR Chulin fell in last, then the Tarovis is mutter? That's only because as soon as the CR of Chulin fell into this mixture, he immediately removed the CR of Truma. But if, on the other hand, Lo Kana V'Silko, he left the CR Shel Truma inside this mixture in the dough, together with the siyar shel chametz, each one independently could not generate chimutz, but the combined power of the two of them caused the leavening of the isa. Then Rabbi Eliezer would say it's asur, even though the achron was chul. And the reason for this is because zev v'zeh gorem asur. So you have two powers, each of which independently is not capable of generating an isa. But if the two of them join forces, then it's us. And now the Gemara is going to reject Abaye's logic. Mimai the time of the Rabbi Eliezer ki Abaye, who says that Abaye's interpretation of Rabbi Eliezer is the only act in town. In truth, the Gemara is going to argue that even in a case where the CR of Isur is been removed, Dilma time of Rabbi Eliezer, Mishum diachar achron aniba. Loshna kadav v'silek esa isu, loshna lo kadav v'silek esa isu. Meaning that according to the Gemara's alternative interpretation of the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer, it's not true the premise that Abaye had suggested that if the CR of Isur remains there at the time that it became chametz, and the sar of Isur here is the sar of Truma, was still in the Taroves at the time that the chimutz was clinched, then it becomes asur. Perhaps Rabbi Eliezer would say the following, that Rabbi Eliezer is going to be matir the case of a Taroves when the Sa'ar of Chulin came last, and the Isa now is mutter, because he has a principle of Achrei Achron Aniba. What was the actual catalyst that clinched the process of Chimutz? And in this case, it was the Sa'ar of Chulin. And it matters not whether the Sa'ar of Truma is still in the mixture or it's been removed. And therefore, Loshna Silek, Loshna, Slow Silek, even if he was not misalik the CR of truma. Nevertheless, the tarovis is asur. Or I should say, in the other way around, because now we're talking about a case, depends what the case is, but if the sequence was that the CR of Chulin was last, then even though the CR of Truma is still in the dough, it's mutter. And if, let's say, the two CRs, the CR of Truma together with the CR of Chulin had fallen simultaneously, and neither one of them was capable in and of itself of generating chibutz, then the whole tarovis is mutter. And the reason for that is because zev is egorim mutter. You cannot prove from Rabbi Eliezer that zev is egorim is asur unless you accept Abai's interpretation. That it all depends upon silko and low silko. And if it was low silko, Rabbi Eliezer would asur the tarovis even if the achron was chulin. No, that's not true. We're going to say that if the achron was chulin, that's ipso facto an automatic matir, even if low silko, even though the Isa has now within it, right now, as is, Basheru Sham, the CR of Truma. Why? Because the Achron, the clincher, was Chul. But if they both fell in together, the CR of Truma together with the CR of Chulin, it would be Mut. Ella, now we have to find a different source to prove that, according to Rabbi Eliezer, Zev Gorem is us. So let's just make sure we're all on the right, have the right place. We're up to Ella, which is 10 lines down from the top of Chav Zayin Amud Aleph. The first word of the line is Achas. Ella, let's derive the conclusion that Rabbi Eliezer maintains that Zev Gorem is asur from a statement of Rabbi Eliezer regarding Atzei Asherah, which means these branches of wood have the status of Avodah Zarah. And we have a Mishnah in Masechta Avodah Zarah that records the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer. Natal Heimenu, Eitzim. He takes branches off a tree that's Asherah, have the status of Avodah Zarah, Surba No. He's not allowed to use them for his own benefit. So, for example, if he wants to take Atzei Asherah and use them as fuel for his fire, that's prohibited. Hisik bahem satanur. What happens if he used Atzei Asherah, which are Isurei Ana, for fuel, and he heats up his oven? Now, there are a number of different dimensions to this question in different scenarios. Number one, when you have a new oven, then it needs to be heated up in order to strengthen the walls of the oven. And that's a hana that he'll get in the case of a new oven. And even if it's an old oven, which is sturdy and strong, it doesn't need this burning process, this heating process. But nevertheless, if you put something into the oven, that will have been baked or cooked as a result of the Atzei Asherah that we use to create the fuel and generate the heat inside the oven. So first, the Mishnah addresses the question of the status of the oven itself henceforth. If it's chadash, it's a brand new oven, it's never been used, yutats, we have to destroy it. You can never get benefit from this oven because the facilitator of strengthening the oven and completing its ability to function as an oven was the Atzei Asherah that were the fuel that supplied the heat. But Yashan, Yutzan. If it's Yashan, it's an old, used tanur. It doesn't matter how old it is, but it's been used and strengthened already in the past. Now, the only benefit he would get would be if he would put a dough into the oven right now. The heat that's trapped in the oven comes directly from the Atzei Asherah. So Yutzan, let him wait a few minutes till the oven cools off. Afabo esapas, if he didn't wait until the oven would cool down and he put his dough into the oven and the dough now leavened and it became a pas, it became a loaf of bread, asura bana, that loaf of bread would, if you would enjoy it, would mean that you're benefiting from the Atzei Asherah that heated up this dough and made it possible for it to bake. This arva be'acheros, if somehow this pas that was baked in the oven that was heated up by Atzei Asher now got lost, we can't identify it. It's mixed up with other loaves of bread. And not only that, acheros ba'acheros, even if there's a second tarovis. So the first tarovis was a tarovis between the pas and other kikros. Now one of those kikros from that first tarovis gets mixed up in a second tarovis. Is kulam asurim ba'no. In other words, whereas in other isurim we have a principle called bittul, not with regard to avodah zarah. Avodah zarah is so strict and severe that there's no din of bittul. So even if you had 1,000 pieces of bread against this one piece of bread, that's avodah zarah in a taroves, everything is awesome. Rabbi Eliezer now is recorded in the same Mishnah of avodah zarah as the dissenting view. Omer, he says, Yolich ana liyama melach. What he can do is he can evaluate how much this pas that was baked by Atzei Asher is worth on the market. He comes to the conclusion it's worth 10. He takes out of his pocket 10 and he throws it into the Dead Sea. And therefore he's not benefiting from this pas. Why? Because whatever monetary benefit, he's already taken it and thrown it into the water. So it's gone. Amrulo, the Chacham say to Rabbi Eliezer, ain't pidyon avodah zarah. You have a pas that's been baked by avodah zarah. It's now a cheftzid nisur. You can't redeem it and transfer its iser over to your money and then throw out the money. In any event, we see clearly that according to Rabbi Eliezer, if he doesn't take the money out of his pocket and throw it into the Yam HaMelech, he also agrees to the Tanakama that the status of the pas is that it's asura. And he also would agree that with regard to the status of the oven, if it's a brand new oven, and this is the first time it's being heated up with Atzei Asherah, then that has to be destroyed. He can never benefit from this oven. Rashi already points out that when he uses the oven to bake a pas, and it's a situation, as we'll explain, of zev gorem, the Gemara could have quoted the Tanakama, who says yutats, that we have to get rid of this oven. We can never use it again. The Gemara only quotes Rabbi Eliezer instead of quoting the anonymous Chachamim, because we have a specific name and identity of that Tana. But fundamentally, although there's machlokas here about Yolich Hanoli Yamamelech is the pidyon, so to speak, for Avodah Zarah, but Rabbi Eliezer agrees to the fundamental principle of the Chachamim Yutats, that this oven cannot be used henceforth, and that's based on the principle of Zev Goren. Why is that so? Because we already had on the previous Amud that we discussed yesterday, Chavav Beis, a brisa, and there the brisa was talking about a case where you heated up an oven with klipe arla or klayaker, which is a survana, and there the brisa went as far as to say that even if it's a tanur yashan, even if it's tanur chadash, a brand new oven, yutzan, you're allowed to use this oven henceforth. You just have to wait until the heat dissipates. That reflects the sheet of the Chachamim, who disagree with this second brisa, and they hold that if you go ahead and you bake in this oven, then the pas is permissible. Why is that? Because there are two garmim here. It's zev gorem, and the Chachamim in the first brisa hold that zev gorem is mutter. There's one gorem of the heat of the eitzim that impact on the oven, and then when you put your pas into the oven itself is a gorem to bake the dough. So it's a second gorem. This brisa, the second brisa, the one of Atzei Asherah, is maintaining that zev gorem is also. So the Gemara rejects this. Amar the Shamet Leila Rabbi Eliezer, the Avodah Zarah the Chamer Isura, but B'Shar Isura B'Torah Mi Shamet Le. We already have established that with regard to Avodah Zarah, if this kikar of Avodah Zarah gets mixed up in other kikaros and another taromas and another one, even be'el, if it's low batil, we have a chumrah in Avodah Zarah that puts it on a separate level, and therefore we're going to apply the principle of zev zegorim asur, but only exclusively in the case of Avodah Zarah because of its chumrah. So the Gemara responds and says, Ela imkain aman tarme. We have the second brisa, and the second brisa maintains that if you will heat up this oven for the first time with atzei ashera, then you can never use the oven henceforth. Yutats. Who's the author of that brisa? I mean, after all, in the first brisa, in the case of klipe orla or kashin shel kloya kerem, there we didn't find any Tana who would say that it's mutter. In fact, lo matzinu Tana acher sheyomer zev gorim asu elo Rabbi Eliezer, and we know that the Chacham in the first brisa disagree with Rabbi Eliezer. The Tanya beheja, we have explicitly the brisa v'chein hoya Rabbi Eliezer oser b'chol yisurim Shabbat Torah. So the Gemara has two explanations as to why we assume that Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah of Avodah Zarah holds zev gorim not only in Avodah Zarah exclusively, but in all isurim. Number one, because otherwise we cannot pin down that Mandiyama who says yutats, that in a zev gorim situation we paskin that it's asur. Who would be the Tana? The Tana that represents the Chacham in the first brisa would not accept zev gorim asur. So it has to be by possible elimination the shita of Rabbi Eliezer. And secondly, we have a brisa that says explicitly that Rabbi Eliezer's initial statement regarding Atzei Asherah was now extended by the brisa to all Isurei Torah. Now, at this point, the Gemara wants to clarify what is the sheet of Rebbe. Omar Abaye, Imtim Salomar, if you're going to tell me that you have some sort of a brisa, we don't know that this brisa exists, that formulates the shita of Rebbe, that the pas itself is asur, and it means that the tanur is the first, the Eitze, the Atzim of Klipe Orla, etc., on the first Gorim, and then you have a second Gorim in terms of the Tanur. That means that Rebbe holds Zevizeh Gorim is awesome. So that the first Brisa that says that Tana is an anonymous Tana that's quoted as saying that Tana Shisiku Beklipe Orla Chadash Yutat, so we have to get rid of this oven, we can never bake in this oven. That's Rebbe and Hainu Rabbi Eliezer. And Rabbi Eliezer and Rebbe are on the same page. They both agree that Zevezer Gorim is us. The imta Taloma, but if you're going to tell me that Rebbe actually holds Zevezer Gorim Mutter, and that brisa that says that in a new Tanur that was blasted and heated by Klipe Arli Suryana is Yutats, that would only reflect the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer, but not the sheet of Rebbe. V'hacha, when Rebbe says that if you were to bake the dough immediately after it was heated up by Klipe Arla in that same oven, the pas is asura, then, says Abaye, it's not based on Zevez and Gorem asur, but rather it's based on a different principle, which is called Mishum B'Yeshvach Eitzim B'Pas. That as a result of the fact that this dough was baked, the baking itself is a benefit directly from the Atei Orla. The heat that baked the oven comes from Isuri Hana. That's called Shvach Eitzim B'Pas. In other words, when a person eats this pas, that's not Zevizeh Gorim. That's not Gorim to the second degree. There's only one Gorim here. He is going to benefit from the heat that baked this pas. And in the case of Tanur Chadash, that would be zev gorem. If he wants to use that tanur later after it cools off, that would be mutter according to Rebbe. Zev gorem is mutter. However, hani karos v'kosos utzluchios, if you have various kinds of utensils like cups and bowls and plates, and in the process of taking this earthenware and making it into a piece of pottery, a utensil, you needed to use atze, let's say ashera or klipe orla, etc. Then asire, even Rebbe, despite the fact that he rejected the principle according to this side of Rabbi Eliezer Seven Segorim Asur, he would prohibit it because there's no second gorem over here. The kli itself was created by the heat of Atzei Ashera, and now he's benefiting directly from the kli. It's not like the case of the tanur, where the tanur is going to heat up the oven and then he puts his dough into the oven. Here he's eating directly from the tzluchis and the carrots. Ki pligi, when would Rebbe, if he rejects Seven Zegorim, argue against Rabbi Eliezer? That's only the tanur ukidera, when you have brand new ovens or pots. And then he's not going to directly benefit from the oven or the pot. The oven is going to maintain the heat, or the pot, the heat, and then he's going to bake or cook inside the oven or inside the pot. And that depends upon the machlokas now between Rebbe and Rabbi Eliezer. To Lamadi over Seven Zegorim Asur, Asur. Lamadi over Seven Zegorim Mutter, according to Rebbe, Mutter, Shari. Ika Diamri, now we have a second Lishna that expresses a dissenting view against Abai. Afilu Lamadi over Seven Zegorim Mutter, Kidera, Asura. You're telling me that if they were mitzare, if they strengthened this kedera with atzei isur, then if you hold zevazeb mutter, then you'd be allowed to benefit from it. No, here's asura. Why? Why is a kedera asura? The hakibla bishula mekame b'nitan eitzim behetera. In other words, a person has what we call hanas tashmish. He's enjoying the benefit and the use of this kedera without another goring. Why? Because whatever food he puts inside the pot, he's benefiting from the fact that the pot is holding on to the food. In other words, it's not just that the kedera is a facilitator to hold on to the heat of the water that's boiling and facilitate the bishul, but it's also a receptacle that's holding on to whatever is in the pot. So I throw in my vegetables into the pot, and I'm being menef from the pot itself. Again, it's not as profound as the case of a kara or a kos where I eat directly from the pot, but nevertheless, there's a direct contact between the food and the pot itself. And therefore, it's not similar to the case of tanur. In the case of tanur, you heat it up to tanur, and then with atzei isur, and then you put your dough inside the tanur. He's not benefiting directly from the tanur. He's benefiting from the heat that's produced by the tanur. That's a second gorem in addition to the atzei ashera, and zeves gorem according to Rebbe Yismur. Rav Yosef, Rav Yudim Shmuel, tanur shisiku beklipe orla bekashin shel klaya kerem chadash yutatz yashan yutzan. It means that Shmuel, according to this tradition, accepts the position of Zev Gorim Asur, and therefore the tanur, if it's a brand new tanur, is Asur. Ofabas Apas. Rebbe Omer Apas Muteres. Achamim Omrim Apas Asura. If afterwards he goes and he bakes in this oven, Rebbe says that he can still eat the loaf of bread. Chacham say it's us. The Gemara immediately asks on Shmuel Vatanya Ibcha. We had a brisa earlier that says just the opposite. That Rebbe would say that the pas is asur. It was only the Chacham who said muteres, and the Gemara answers Shmuel Ibcha Tani. Shmuel presented it in the opposite way. He had a different tradition as to what the shitos, respectively, of Rebbe and the Chacham be by Seima. Others say that Shmuel may have had the Bryce exactly the way out we said it, but he switched around the names. Why would he do such a thing? The Alma Kasavar Shmuel, everybody knows that based on the general rules of Psak of Shmuel, halacha Rebbe mechaver v'lo mechaver. So if the Chacham reject Rebbe, then in such a case, we would say that we paskin like the Chacham, which means the pas is muteres. But Shmuel felt that this was the exception to the rule, and that we're going to paskin like Rebbe, possibly because Rabbi Eliezer agrees with Rebbe, so he's not a das yochid, and therefore to impress upon the public that we paskin that the pas is asura, sover asne ivcha. I would be better off if I switched around the names. So instead of the Chacham saying that the pas is muteres, now Shmuel is presenting it that the Chacham say the pas is asura, which is really in truth the sheet of Rebbe. But had Shmuel presented it to the public as the sheet of Rebbe, they would have assumed that Shmuel paskins like Chachamim lekula, but in fact he paskins like Rebbe lechum. Now the Gemara quotes the last part of the brisa: Bishla gabi gecholim b'riakol pas muteres. If he took the klipe orla, the kashin shel kalayim, and the same would apply to Tatzei Asherah, and he burnt them in such a way that now they are coals, and now he puts his dough on top of the coals, everybody agrees the pas is muteres. It means that we no longer have klipe orla. Now we have gecholim. It's a whole new entity. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. And the same tradition comes from Rabbi Chia bar Ashi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. And there's going to be now a controversy. We don't know who holds what. Chan Amar, according to one opinion, Lo Shanu, when do we say the pas is permitted? Ella gecholim omimos. If we're talking about a case where these gecholim were very, very hot, and now they began to cool off. So they reached their maximum level of heat, and therefore the eitzim are completely consumed. They no longer exist in this world. And therefore there's no Isar Hana to use these gecholim, and there's no reason to prohibit the pas. Aval gecholim lo chashos. But if the coals over here did not cool off yet, they didn't reach their maximum height, they're still hot because of the klipe arla, asuri. According to one opinion, even Rebbe, who holds Zevazeh Gorim is mutter, will asa the pas in this case. Even though there is a very early stage in which these gecholim are still getting heated up, nevertheless, it's not considered klipe arla, and there's no Yisra no. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. I understand that lo chashos should be asurim the yeshvach eitzim v'pas. In other words, you're benefiting in the pas directly from the eitzim. Elamandi omer afilu lo chashos mutarim. I don't get it. Lo chashos mutarim, how could that be? Pas, the osar mishum the yeshvach eitzim v'pas leRebbe heichimish kachzei. Rebbe went on record as saying that if you heat up your bread, your dough, with klipe orla, then it's awesome. Why? Because the yeshvach eitzim v'pas. Under what circumstance it would be yeshvach eitzim v'pas? By definition, the very moment that you burn the klipe orla and the fire comes up, it's already consumed and it's already gecholim. Call it lo chashos, but now you tell me that even lo chashos are mutaros. Rav Papa says that the only situation which Rebbe applies the Isser of Yeshvach Eitzim V'pas is Kshavuka Kenegdo, which means that when he puts the Eitzim into this oven, the flame is coming directly from the Eitzim into the pas. Why? It's Kavuka Kenegdo. The Afiyas HaPas takes place when the Eitzim are still burning, and the fire is going from the eitzim directly into the pas. That's called shvach eitzim b'pas. But if, on the other hand, he waits until the eitzim become gecholim, that's already, even in a case where they're still burning, that's already gecholim, and gecholim does not generate an isur in the pas.